The summer of 1456 carried an ominous weight across Christian Europe. In the Hungarian borderlands, where the Danube meets the Sava River, 3,000 exhausted knights stood upon crumbling ramparts, gazing across fields now blackened by the advancing shadow of an empire. Below them, stretching to the horizon like a dark ocean, 60,000 Ottoman warriors made camp. The thunder of 300 cannons being positioned echoed across the valley, each boom a death knell for the white city of Belgrade. What transpired in the days to come would defy every principle of medieval warfare, every calculation of military strategy, every expectation of rational men. The church bells of Christendom would ring at noon for the next 5 centuries to commemorate what seemed, even to those who witnessed it, like the hand of something beyond mortal understanding, reaching down to alter the course of history. 3 years earlier, Constantinople had fallen. The Queen of Cities, the eternal fortress that had stood for 1,000 years as the bulwark between East and West, had crumbled in 53 days under the relentless bombardment of Sultan Mehmed II. The young conqueror, barely past his 21st year, had achieved what generations of Ottoman sultans could only dream of. His great cannons, monsters of bronze and iron that required 60 oxen to transport, had reduced the Theodosian walls to rubble and dust. The last Byzantine emperor died sword in hand upon those walls, and with him died the final ember of Rome's glory. Now, at 23, Mehmed turned his gaze northward. Belgrade represented more than another city to conquer. It was the key that would unlock the entirety of Europe. If Belgrade fell, nothing stood between the Ottoman tide and the soft underbelly of Christendom. The Hungarian plains would become a highway to Vienna, and from Vienna, the path to Rome itself lay open. Yet 2 men stood in defiance of this destiny. John Hunyadi, known throughout Europe as the White Knight, had spent 20 years defending the frontier against Ottoman expansion. At 50 years of age, his body bore the accumulated wounds of countless battles, and disease gnawed at his vitality with each passing day. But his mind remained sharp as Damascus steel, capable of seeing 3 moves ahead in the deadly chess game of medieval warfare. Hunyadi understood the Ottoman war machine intimately. He had studied their tactics, fought their elite janissaries, and survived encounters that had destroyed lesser commanders. He was Europe's shield, forged through blood and iron over 2 decades of unending conflict. The second man could not have been more different. John of Capistrano was a Franciscan friar of 70 years, his body worn thin by decades of walking from village to village, preaching holy war with a fervor that could move mountains. Where Hunyadi relied on discipline and tactical brilliance, Capistrano wielded faith like a flaming sword. He had traversed Bavaria, Austria, and Hungary, his words igniting something primal in the hearts of common folk. University students abandoned their studies. Farmers left crops unharvested in the fields. Craftsmen dropped their tools mid-work. They came in their thousands, 40,000 souls, armed with nothing but pitchforks, scythes, hammers, and an unshakable conviction that God would grant them victory. The 2 Johns despised each other's methods with an intensity that bordered on hatred. Hunyadi saw Capistrano's peasant army as a liability, untrained rabble who would break at the first clash of arms. Capistrano viewed Hunyadi's calculated warfare as a lack of faith, a refusal to trust in divine providence. Yet circumstances had bound them together in this desperate hour. The professional soldier who understood the mathematics of war, and the holy man who believed those mathematics could be overwritten by fervent prayer. Neither could succeed without the other, and both knew it, though they would never speak such acknowledgement aloud. The Ottoman host that assembled before Belgrade represented the pinnacle of military power in the medieval world. Conservative estimates placed the army at 60,000 men, though some chroniclers would later claim 100,000. At its core stood 10,000 janissaries, the Sultan's elite infantry. These were not common soldiers drawn from peasant levies. They were Christian boys, taken in childhood through the Devshirme system, converted to Islam, and trained from the age of 7 to be perfect instruments of war. They knew no family but their regiment, no loyalty but to the Sultan, no fear of death because paradise awaited the faithful. They wore distinctive white caps and carried the most advanced firearms available, and, in their entire history, they had never fled a battlefield. Supporting them came the Sipahi cavalry, armored horsemen who had perfected the art of mobile warfare across 3 continents. The Azabi regulars, light infantry, trained for siege work, filled out the ranks alongside engineers, sappers, and ammunition carriers. This was not merely an army, but a sophisticated military machine designed for one purpose: reducing fortified cities to smoking rubble. The true terror, however, lay in Mehmed's artillery train. 300 cannons of varying sizes, but the crown jewel was the basilica, a monster that fired stone projectiles weighing 600 kilograms. When tested, the concussive force of its discharge reportedly killed birds in flight and shattered windows in villages 3 miles distant. Each shot required 3 hours to reload, but a single impact could breach any wall constructed by human hands. The Ottoman fleet matched this terrestrial might with 200 vessels controlling the Danube, transforming the river into an Ottoman lake and preventing any relief force from reaching the besieged city. Against this overwhelming force stood Hunyadi's professionals, perhaps 10,000 men who had survived years of frontier warfare. Hungarian knights in plate armor, Bohemian mercenaries hardened by constant conflict, Serbian auxiliaries who knew every stone and stream of their homeland. Good soldiers all, but exhausted from unending campaigns and outnumbered 6-1 even before counting Capistrano's untested peasants. Belgrade itself occupied a position of sublime strategic importance. The upper town, containing the castle and noble quarters, sat upon high ground overlooking the confluence of 2 great rivers. The lower town spread along the riverbank, home to merchants, craftsmen, and warehouses that sustained the city's commerce. Stone walls encircled both sections, but these fortifications belonged to an earlier age, constructed before gunpowder had transformed the art of siegecraft. Hunyadi had done what he could in the months before the siege. Ditches were deepened, gates reinforced, and his few precious cannons positioned at key points. Yet everyone who walked those walls understood the fundamental truth. When the basilica spoke, stone would crumble like bread crust. As July began, Ottoman outriders appeared on the horizon. Citizens fled with whatever possessions they could carry. Priests held final masses for those who remained. Soldiers sharpened their weapons and made peace with their god, knowing that death walked among them now, patient and inevitable. In the Ottoman camp, a different ritual unfolded. Engineers assembled the great cannons with methodical precision. Janissaries performed their prayers and blessed their weapons, preparing their souls for the martyrdom that would open the gates of paradise. Mehmed, confident in his inevitable victory, sent the traditional ultimatum to the city's defenders: surrender and live as subjects of the Sultan, or resist and face total annihilation. The messenger returned with a Hungarian arrow buried in his shoulder. Belgrade's answer could not have been clearer. The Sultan nodded, almost pleased. He preferred cities that resisted. Their conquest brought more glory, more proof of Ottoman superiority. As dawn broke on the 4th of July, the basilica fired its opening shot. The massive stone projectile traced a lazy arc through the morning air before striking Belgrade's outer wall with the force of an earthquake. Dust billowed skyward. Stone fragments rained down like hail. The siege had begun. For 10 days, hell descended upon Belgrade. The basilica fired every 3 hours with mechanical regularity, each discharge shaking the city to its foundations. Smaller cannons maintained constant bombardment between these apocalyptic strikes, hurling stone balls and early explosive shells in an unending barrage designed to shatter both walls and spirits. By the 3rd day, gaps appeared in the outer fortifications. By the 7th day, entire sections had collapsed into slopes of rubble that would serve as assault ramps for Ottoman infantry. Inside Belgrade, Hunyadi orchestrated the impossible. Women and children hauled stones to plug breaches, while blacksmiths worked without sleep, forging ammunition and repairing weapons. Priests moved among the defenders, offering last rites and absolution to men who knew they would not survive the coming storm. The upper town's walls still stood firm, but the lower town died stone by stone, each dawn revealing fresh devastation. The Ottoman engineers worked with the methodical precision learned at Constantinople. They concentrated fire on key defensive points, creating multiple breaches to divide the defenders' attention. The psychological impact of constant bombardment was as valuable as the physical destruction. Men can endure fear for a time, but the unending thunder of cannons wears away courage like water eroding stone. Mehmed watched from his silk pavilion, noting every weakness, planning the final assault with the patience of a master craftsman. His janissaries waited with practiced discipline, knowing their moment would approach. But Hunyadi had not survived 20 years of frontier warfare by fighting predictable battles. He understood that Mehmed's true strength lay not in the army's size, but in its supply chain. 60,000 men required vast quantities of food, water, and ammunition. Everything flowed up the Danube on those 200 ships. Sever that lifeline, and the siege would strangle itself. On the 14th of July, Hunyadi unveiled his desperate gamble. He had assembled 40 boats, a pitiful fleet of fishing vessels, merchant barges, and anything else that could float. Each had been packed with tar-soaked wood, sulfur, and anything that would burn hot and fast. His plan bordered on madness: sail directly into the Ottoman fleet, set everything ablaze, and pray that chaos would triumph over numbers. The Hungarians struck at dawn when mist still clung to the river's surface. Ottoman sailors woke to nightmare made manifest. Flaming vessels bearing down through the fog, Hungarian warriors leaping between ships with torches blazing and swords drawn. Naval combat on a river is chaos incarnate. There is no room to maneuver, no space to form proper battle lines. The current pushes burning wrecks into packed formations. Smoke becomes so thick that friend and foe merge into indistinguishable shadows, stabbing at anything that moves. For 5 hours, the Danube burned. Hungarian raiders in small boats darted between Ottoman galleys, hurling clay pots filled with Greek fire and boarding wherever gaps appeared in the enemy formation. The Ottoman admiral attempted to restore order, but the river's narrow confines worked against him. Ships collided, their rigging tangling together. Flames spread from vessel to vessel with terrifying speed. Men in armor drowned by the hundreds, because swimming becomes impossible when steel encases your body. What happened next defied every principle of naval warfare that commanders had studied since antiquity. 40 boats should never defeat 200, but fire and current care nothing for numerical advantage. The Ottoman fleet, pride of the empire's naval power, became a burning mass drifting downstream toward the iron gates. Supply barges exploded as flames reached stored gunpowder, each detonation adding to the pandemonium. The blockade shattered like glass struck by a hammer. In his pavilion, Mehmed received reports with mounting disbelief. His perfect siege, his methodical plan crafted with the lessons learned at Constantinople, undone by fishing boats and desperate courage. For the first time since claiming his great victory over Byzantium, something had gone catastrophically wrong. His rage was terrible to witness, but rage would not rebuild the fleet. The Danube stood open. Reinforcements poured into Belgrade. Hunyadi's reserves, fresh crusaders still burning with Capistrano's fervor, supplies for the starving defenders. Yet Mehmed had not earned the title conqueror through surrender to setbacks. Setbacks were merely lessons to be absorbed and overcome. He still commanded overwhelming numerical superiority. His cannons had reduced Belgrade's walls to broken teeth. His janissaries remained undefeated in direct combat. The naval battle was an annoyance, nothing more. The true test would come when soldiers met in the rubble and decided the matter with steel and blood. The bombardment intensified to a level that seemed impossible to endure. Mehmed brought his cannons dangerously close to the walls, accepting higher risks of counter-battery fire in exchange for more devastating impacts at point-blank range. By the 20th of July, the lower town's walls existed more as memory than reality, broken stone forming natural assault ramps directly into the city's heart. Both sides understood that the final storm approached. In Belgrade, Hunyadi and Capistrano held their last council of war. The soldier advocated organized defense. Knights positioned at breach points, coordinated counterattacks, measured responses to contain the assault. The priest wanted to unleash his crusaders in one massive charge, faith against steel, divine fury against earthly power. They agreed on only one principle: Belgrade would not fall without such bloodshed that future generations would speak of it in hushed tones. As the sun set on the 21st of July, painting Belgrade's ruins in blood-red light, the Ottoman drums began their death rhythm. The steady beat shifted to rapid thunder that carried for miles across the darkening plain. Mehmed raised his personal banner, lit by torches so all could see the signal they had awaited. 10,000 Janissaries moved like ghosts through the camp, white caps briefly visible in torchlight before vanishing into darkness.